Rightio, and I'll just throw up the slides. It's a fairly grandiose title here I've given this, but at the end of the day, I think I've got a good model here to help you sort of understand your own influencing style. And at the end of the day, I would argue that all of us, regardless of what we do, are in the business of influence. So we're always, we might be trying to influence our boss, we might be trying to influence our partner, we're trying to influence our kids. And while we're doing all that, they're obviously trying to influence us. So it's really about influence in many ways. And again, it's a conversation. So that's the topic for today. As you can see, we've now got to, I'm just going to go back and stop sharing for a moment because I've just got a couple of video clips and I have to actually enable those. Oh, I have done that. That's good. Okay. Yeah, so we're getting through this fairly quickly. We're burning through it, so we're up to number 5, and look, there's a lot that we covered last week, and I hope you got something useful out of it to improve your meetings. This is just a simple thing that I suggested. It was one of many, but I mean, starting your meeting with a win for the week is a very good idea. It creates an upward spiral of positivity, and it gets, and you get to hear a lot of interesting things around the table that you wouldn't have heard otherwise. And normally what happens is we dive into the problems, and the meeting starts off on a kind of a negative. So I just think that's, if you wanted one simple thing that you could improve on with your meetings, then the win for the week is probably not a bad place to start. So there it is. So I'm going to talk about influence because if you go and Google the word influence, you'll get literally millions of definitions. Now, I don't want to bore you with all the definitions, but I just want to give you my definition. I want to talk about the framework, and the framework I put together several years ago because, frankly, there wasn't too much out there, surprise, surprise, in the world of influence. At one end of the spectrum, we've got sort of sales type influence, but that's not necessarily applicable to what we do. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there's a lot of academic stuff that's not really relevant. So that's why I went down this road of putting this together. And then there's 4 influencing strategies, and each of you are probably likely to have a bias towards one of those strategies. And the problem with that is that when you're trying to persuade somebody, you probably are using that style and approach, and that's okay. But the fact is the other person may not be influenced by that. So, for example, if you're a facts and figures person and you're talking to somebody who's very belief-based, no matter how good your facts and figures are, you may not actually influence them. And often what happens is the glaze goes in people's eyes, and we kind of just keep banging on with what we feel comfortable with, even though we probably should change our approach. And if we get time, I'll talk about some tools of influence, some things that you can actually practically do to improve your influence. Now, I've got these 4 leaders here. I'm going to talk about and show some short video clips with, and you probably recognize most of them. I haven't used these people because they're necessarily heroes of mine. What I've done is I've found 4 extremely influential people, and I'm going to share with you how they go about, or what they've done to influence. So you can see you've got Al Gore up in the top left-hand corner, who was the Vice President of the United States during the Clinton administration. And in 2000, he lost the election against George W. Bush, and it was largely because of the irregularities in the state of Florida. So that was the only election in the States that was decided in the Supreme Court, and 500 votes, incredible election. Then then what happened is he then went and reinvented himself as a climate change activist, having, not been successful as president. Then we've got Dr. Martin Luther King, who was a civil rights activist in the 1960s, and he probably gave one of the greatest speeches of all time in 1963, I Have a Dream. And it's a brilliant speech. But basically, he was trying to influence a nation and perhaps the world that civil rights was a critically important plank, and it still is, of course. But he brought to the consciousness of American people that was a critically important, that was important. And then we've got Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister of Great Britain, first female Prime Minister. She was in power for 11 years. And that's an eternity in a democracy. And people either loved her or hated her. There's nothing in between. People sort of, there was no fence sitting regarding Margaret Thatcher. And then we've got Mother Teresa, who was anointed a saint by the Catholic Church a decade or so ago. And obviously she's noted for the work she did in the streets of Calcutta and Bombay and other parts of the world looking after the homeless. All of them are highly influential. And as I say, you could probably pick up any book and you'll probably find derogatory things that are said about each of them. But the reality is, I'm using them because I don't think we can dispute the fact that they were highly influential. And I also think that, and I've also tried to be politically correct, two female, two male, right-wing, left-wing political views. So I've tried to sort of make that, do that as part of the process as well.
Balanced.
Balance, that's the word. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was looking for that. Now, this is my definition of influence. I think it's the power to make other people agree with your opinions or to get them to do what you want willingly and ethically. So it's two things. It's either getting people to see things your way or to get them to behave in a different way. So there's two of those things. Ironically, the hardest of those two is to get people to think differently rather than to act differently. You can often get people to act differently, but it's not sustainable unless you change their thinking. But nevertheless, it's one of those two. And the important point about this is, of course, you can use this for manipulation, but at the end of the day, this is about doing things willingly and ethically. So in other words, the person on the receiving end of your influence wants to be influenced because they can see the value in what you're saying. And also it's done ethically. So it's all done above board. So that's my definition. There's maybe other definitions that might be different, but that's pretty much what I believe it to be. Now, I think all of us should come to the conclusion, and I think I'm preaching to the converted here, but I think all of us should realize that we're all in the business of influence. Every one of us, regardless of who we are. If we interact with human beings, we're obviously trying to persuade people at different times. The reason I say that is that I think that's why this topic is extremely important, because the better we get at this, the more we get our way. And obviously we're always trying to get our way. So we won't always get it, but we can bump up our odds by trying some different approaches. Now, there's three key things when you and I are trying to influence. We've basically got three things that are important. One is our preferred style and approach. Now, if you got a chance to complete the influencing capability profile, you'll already know what your preferred style and approach is. If you haven't done it, I'd suggest you do it. It takes a bit of time, but I think you'll find it very, very worthwhile. Don't forget the other person that you're trying to influence also has a profile. They haven't done the influencing capability profile, but they still have a way of looking at the world. So that's got to be critically important in when you're having a conversation with someone. And the other thing is the context. So, for example, if it's a crisis or an emergency, or you want people to move quickly, then probably collaboration is not going to be your ideal approach because you just don't have time to do that. Now, none of us, sit there and work all this out when we're in the heat of the conversation. So what happens is, my suggestion to you is that if you're not getting your own way, it could well be because your approach is not the same as the approach of the other person, and therefore, it's not working. So stop and then try plan B or C or D. It's a bit like the conflict material we went through. Be versatile and don't be stuck to your own approach, because what that means is that you're only going to be influential in certain situations where other people are compatible with you, you see. So it's about changing your approach. So that's what today's about. This is the model, and it's a very simple model, typical 2x2 matrix. And you can see that up the top, you've got push and pull. And let me just explain what they mean. So push, so people who like to push tend to drive, convey information, tend to shut out the view of the other person, not necessarily aggressively, but that's how they do it. And they usually take the idea to the person. Now, pull is more going with the other person and bouncing off what they're saying, contributing according to what they say, and it's a sort of a more of what you might call an incremental approach. So we're working with and through other people, and each of you would have a bias towards that, one of those two, push or pull. Or if you did the survey and the scores were fairly even, then that's a good thing, because it basically means that you can chop and change, and it's not that you're caught up in using a push style or a pull style. Now, across on the left-hand side, you've got logical and emotional. So logical is more facts. In fact, I've got a little diagram here to show you, there we go. Facts and evidence and rationale and measure and measurement and all of those good things. That's the bias around that. But then you've got, interestingly enough, emotional approach, which is more around feelings, behavior, feelings and values, wearing your heart on your sleeve, so to speak. And within that model, you've got 4 different strategies. You've got investigation, which is a push logical. You've got calculation, which is a pull logical. Emotional, which is a push, motivation, which is a push emotional. Collaboration, which is a pull emotional. So we're going to go through those 4 and actually have a look at them and try and understand what they mean. Those 4 leaders that I shared with you earlier, they actually have excelled in one of those 4. So I've selected them also because they were very good at each of these 4, and they tended to use it a lot in their own style. However, I'm suggesting to you that you should use all 4, depending on the situation and the person you're dealing with. So let's have a look at them in detail, and then we'll have a bit of a Q&A. By the way, this profile here is the electronic version. You can do one online. They're quite a reasonable price, $79, and you can do that. But if you did it in the paper and pencil version I shared with you, it'll be, instead of getting percentages, you'll get numbers here, and you can see that it shows you where your bias is towards influence. And this isn't my profile. It's someone who's actually working with. Obviously, I've taken the name off the profile, but you can see at a glance, and I'm working with them in a coaching capacity. And you can see that there's a couple of things that I'm working on with them. You can see that these 4, what I might call capabilities, underpin the major strategy. So you've got these 4, they contribute to that, these 4 contribute to that, and so forth. So it basically gives you a map to work out where I need to, build up my capacity. And in this case, I'm working with this person on active listening. You can see they've got 43% there and shared ownership. So they're quite autocratic, and I have worked with them to try and just broaden their style so that they're doing a bit more of this as well. So it makes them more versatile and makes them more effective in terms of persuading other people of what they need to do. And the other side of it that's important is if you look at your profile and you notice you've got these high scores here, for example, this person, 83% on gathering evidence, my warning to that person was that you could overuse that, because somebody might be so confident about gathering evidence before they, front a meeting or whatever it might be. That's good in a lot of ways, but of course, not everything requires gathering evidence. A lot of things do, but not everything. And that person could be prone to overusing that, you see. And so it's a great map, because it can tell you where I need to, not over rely on something, and also make sure that, other things are not left off the table either. So, you can look at that and you can say, okay, I've got to do a bit of work on connecting emotionally, or I've got to do a bit of work on, communicating standards, whatever it might be. So I might just stop there before we launch in and have a look at the 4 influencing strategies. Any questions or comments at this stage? All make sense?
It does. It rings a bell with me in terms of looking at using the DISC behavioral and style model. DISC, D is dominance, and I is influence, and S is sort of collaboration and team, and C is detail and accuracy. So it has elements of that about it, Tim.
Yes.
So,
yes.
And the message there is work out what you're good at and where your blind spots are, and learn new skills.
Exactly. And it's the same thing with this. It's another version of that, but it's more about, actually influencing people, whereas DISC's more about personality. So absolutely.
Yes.
So
and I like the words that are in there, that they're useful to have a think about, okay, what could I bring to this particular gathering before I go in there? It relates to what you taught us last week about meetings. I like to think about what's the outcome I'm trying to achieve before I walk in that room.
Yeah. That's a really good tip. And I find that a lot of managers don't go in with an idea about what they want out of the meeting. And of course, they're just sitting there passively wondering what's going to come out of this. So absolutely.
Or what happened.
Or what happened. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's go back and have a look at these 4 people, leaders. Now, the person that I think, and once again, just separate your views about these people from what they're doing. So I just need you to do that, because otherwise you get caught up and say, oh, I like that person, or I don't like that person. Just don't worry about that for the moment. The most important thing is to understand how they go about their way of persuading other people. So Al Gore is a good example of somebody who uses who persuades using logic, an argument, and rationale. And I'm going to show you a short video clip of him in action, just to show you what I mean by that. So forget about what he's talking about. It's more important to see what he's actually doing. So let's have a look at him in action. I'll just fire that up.
But I asked the question, why is it that it goes up and down once each year? And he explained that if you look at the landmass of the Earth, very little of it is south of the equator. The vast majority of it is north of the equator, and most of the vegetation is north of the equator. And so when the northern hemisphere is tilted toward the sun, as it is in our spring and summer, the leaves come out and they breathe in carbon dioxide, and the amount in the atmosphere goes down. But when the northern hemisphere is tilted away from the sun, as it is in our fall and winter, the leaves fall and exhale carbon dioxide, and the amount in the atmosphere goes back up again. And so it's as if the entire Earth, once each year, breathes in and out. So we started measuring carbon dioxide in 1958. And you can see that by the middle 60s, when he showed my class this image, it was already clear that it was going up. I respected him and learned from him so much. I followed this. And when I went to the Congress in the middle 1970s, I helped organize the first hearings on global warming and asked my professor. But I asked the question, why?
Okay. So that gives you a, you can see that there's obviously a strong bias towards, detail, structure, and those sorts of things. And those people will often come to meetings, with their evidence. They'll try and persuade people by quoting statistics and all the rest of it. And that's great when the situation requires it and when people around the room resonate with that style. But it's not so good when people don't. So let's have a look at some professions that use that approach. So if you think about it, and I do a lot of work with police. Interestingly enough, a lot of police you don't just wake up one morning and decide to go and be a police officer. It's usually a calling. It's not something I would like to do, but I'm certainly I certainly agree with what they're trying to do. There's no doubt about that. We need law and order and all those sorts of things. But police generally have to collect the evidence, put a case before a court of law, and then, of course, the court decides on someone's guilt or innocence. So that would be a profession that uses investigation. But scientists and researchers also, what they tend to do is they have a hypothesis and they try and prove or disprove that hypothesis based on a rigorous research methodology. So they also would be prone to using investigation. And of course, it can be highly influential if the paper is delivered and it's timely, and they can obviously shape public policy and all sorts of things. Now, in your workplaces, I would say to you that this would be very appropriate in incidents such as safety or harassment. So, for example, if there's a safety issue in your workplace, you would expect a rigorous and thorough investigation. You would expect a report. You'd expect someone to go through all the details and come to a resolution or a conclusion. That we'd expect that. And it's the same with harassment as well. If somebody was jumping up and down about harassment, you would be expecting that a thorough investigation would be done to determine, whether that was happening or what was happening and all the rest of it. That's great. But in situations where you're trying to large-scale change, when you want people on board, it won't work. And this is where a lot of mistakes are made, because you want to win the hearts and minds of people, and all the facts and logic in the world is not necessarily going to persuade people unless they've got skin in the game. And you see the blind spot there, because we could jump in and throw lots of things around, but unless we engage people in a major change, they're likely not to accept it because they just see it as something that's sort of out there. So that's investigation. Let's look at the other one around calculation. By the way, I couldn't think of a better word than calculation. I'm trying to get them to finish with OR. So, it sounds a little bit devious, but it's not. It's actually very, it's not devious at all. What calculators will tend to do is to talk up the benefits of their proposal and also to talk down the current situation. So they get this leverage. And the best example I can give you is that 6 months ago, I was walking through a shopping centre. I walked past Harvey Norman's, and I walked past the IT part, and they had a sign on the door, 40% off laptops. And I thought, wow, that looks pretty good to me. I wasn't planning on buying one, but it got me in the door, you see. So that's the carrot. And when I got in the door, there was another sign there that said, must purchase by the close of business today. So that was the stick. So basically it got me in the door. I didn't walk out with a laptop, but at the end of the day, what it did is it persuaded me to go and have a look. Now, I'm sure they would have sold a lot of laptops on the day. So retailers use this a lot, and it's very effective. And the best example I can give you is Margaret Thatcher. Now, as I said earlier, very clear about what she stood for. And in fact, there were people actually dancing in the street when she died. That's how, there was people that either loved her or hated her. There was absolutely nothing in between. And that's because of her style. So let's have a look at her in action. And this is an interview she did with Richard Carlton many years ago. And just watch how she's got very strong views on the one hand, and she's quite willing to denigrate the views that are counter to that on the other. So let's have a look.
Tell me about relations with Mr. Gorbachev. Is it Mikhail and Margaret?
No, it is Mr. Gorbachev, or Secretary General. We get on well.
Do you trust him as a communist?
I have always, whenever we have come to an agreement about what should be done, or he's promised to look into a case, he has always done precisely what he said he would do, and more. Because when he became Secretary General, and shortly before I went to the Soviet Union, he made a speech, I went in the March, he made a speech in the January. All of a sudden, I realized that here was a man of history, with a historic vision for the Soviet Union, fantastic courage, because he'd seen that 70 years of communism hadn't worked. I realized immediately that we were dealing with a kind of Russian that I'd never encountered before. He didn't come with a lot of briefs which he read out. He came, as I do, with a few notes which he'd made himself. He'd thought things out. He could argue, he could discuss, he could debate, just as Mr. Hawke and I can argue, discuss, debate. It was marvelous, and we did it on the basis of mutual respect. I dislike communism. I dislike everything in it. And now he's moving away from it. But I said, look, you're just as much entitled to defend your system as we are entitled to defend ours. I immediately said a phrase, quite instinctively, which has become world famous. This is a man with whom I can do business.
On the other
There's
side,
more hope in the world now, internationally, than I have known in my lifetime.
But on the other side of the Atlantic, President Reagan, I know this is an Australian term, would you call him a mate of yours?
Indeed, yes, I would. I knew him before he was president. He knew me before I was prime minister.
But you
we believed in the same things.
Do you have doubts
long
though?
Before we were president or prime minister.
Okay.
Tell me about relations with Mr. Gorbachev.
Okay. So I'll just stop there. Oh no, I'll just keep going. I'll just do this slide and then we'll have a little chat. The salespeople use this all the time, don't they? What's the upside? And if you don't purchase, what's the downside? Financial advisors will tell you this is the best, this is the best financial opportunity and you better get in quick on the ground floor. If you think about a teacher that you had at school that you really respected, I'll guarantee to you that they drew a line in the sand and you knew exactly where it was and you felt safe because you knew where that line was. So calculators are very good at creating a sense of certainty about what's right and wrong. Now, if you had to implement any change in your workplace that affected your employees or people who you're working with and their working methods, it would be a good idea to sell the benefits of the change. What's in it for them, assuming there is something in it for them, and a lot of times there is, and what would be the consequences of not changing for them. So in other words, you leverage the proposal against those two. So that would work well. However, if you're trying to, let's say that, let's say there were budget cuts or something, or let's say there's directions a bit vague and unclear. If things are a bit wishy-washy and people don't quite understand what you're proposing, then you've got to go back and explain that, because there's no good talking about pros and cons if people don't know why you're doing what you're doing. So, again, if you've got a bias in this area, you might jump too quickly into that before you actually give people perhaps all the detail and the facts about the situation that you're in. So there's the two logical approaches, and I'll get into the other ones in a moment, but some of you might have questions or comments at this stage. All right, it's because we've all been there, haven't we, where we've tried to persuade somebody and the glaze goes in their eyes and we get frustrated. And the reason we get frustrated, one of the ways to explain that is because we're pushing our way and the other person's not buying it. And so the trouble is we just keep banging on with it over and over again. And we've got to stop and say, this isn't working. What have I got to do differently? And that's the key message out of today, a bit like the conflict stuff that we did as well. So
Tim, can I make an observation for you?
Absolutely.
If I'm trying to build a senior leadership group, I'd look for some investigators to be on that group, and I'd look for some calculators. The investigators can research it and look at the various options, and the calculators can make sure we look at the pluses and minuses of each option. Absolutely. So I want people of those styles or capabilities on the team and briefed that I want some good research, and I want it plus and minus, and I want all our options so we can visually have a look at that and decide.
You've got it. And I'd go even further. If you had 4 positions, I'd be kind of thinking, well, okay, what about some value-based leaders as well, just so that they're not just crunching numbers.
Yes.
And they understand that there's human beings at the end of the decisions.
Well, I can take care of that. I just want the other 2 to cover my arse, mate.
Yes, because you and your...
Because I'm not good at those 2 things.
No. But you see this a lot. I see this a lot in businesses where you've got a senior team that's very much they've got a strong bias towards rational approach. Yep. And everyone thinks, well, they're cold and they haven't thought this through and this isn't good for the people that work for them. And so that part gets missing. And so we've got to make sure that we cover all bases here. Otherwise, we're going to lose some people along the way.
Yes.
Okay, let's go back.
Sorry, Mike, just quickly on the retail side of things that you're talking about before.
Yeah.
That is very strong, very potent. You know, I'm selling this over here.
Yes.
I'm going to get you to buy this.
Yes.
You know, we work on that continuously, as you can imagine.
Yes.
So and then the calculators just come in on top of that. You know, if we sell so many of this and not so many of that, where does the income lay? And it's a strong tool in retail sales. Yeah. I agree with you totally there.
Yeah.
And I think Andrew's right. You do need two. If you've got one person who can do both, or a multiple task type of thing, they're one in a kind. I think I don't know what some of the ratio would be, but I think it would be pretty rare. But when you do have that person, you know, and I've come across those people in my 28 years in the business I'm in now, it is a very strong weapon to have in your armoury.
Absolutely.
If they can do both, or if they can do 3 things, it's even better.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's rare. But the other side of it that's interesting is that we often surround ourselves with people that think like us, whether we do it consciously or not, but usually it's subconscious. And that's not good because you'll agree with them, but at the end of the day, you're missing a key, you're missing something. And
less conflict.
Yeah, exactly. It's
easier.
Yeah, exactly. And when you look at that chart I showed you, it's the opposites. Investigators and collaborators are often don't see eye to eye, and then motivators and calculators don't often see eye to eye. And I'll explain that a bit more now because you can see that in action. I'll just go back, and we've done that, so we'll go on. Let's have a look at Martin Luther King. Now, Martin Luther King, as I said, he gave this great speech in '63. There were no facts in it whatsoever, but that wasn't a problem. It was all about beautiful timing and rhetoric and wording and all that sort of stuff. So he was a big picture thinker, and big picture thinkers. Now I might as well declare this is me here. So this is where it got interesting for me, because when I was managing, what I often do would I try and paint the big picture to motivate the team. And the glaze would go in people's eyes, and some people come up to me and say, look, I don't care about all that. Just tell me what you want me to do. And that'd just drive me nuts, because I've a bias, you see, towards this, you see, and it's quite legitimate, actually, what they're asking. And I just realized, well, yeah, maybe these people are just motivated by being given a job to do, a clear job. Off you go and do it to the best of your ability. So these people are big picture thinkers. Let's have a look at him in action. I'm only going to show you a little bit, obviously, but and it's an old video clip, 63, but you can get the message.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream.
So you can see all about timing and beautiful rhetoric and all the rest of it. Very few facts, if any, none. Entrepreneurs do this. You know, if you take say someone like an Elon Musk, what are they doing? They're talking big picture. They're talking about populating Mars, big picture. And what they do is they surround themselves with people who are detail people, and they will, they'll fill in the gaps, the engineers and all the rest of it. Advertising executives only got a split second to get our attention, so they tug on our heartstrings. We see it all the time. And so if you're trying to create a strategic direction for your business, or what you're trying to do, a good idea is to get your team engaged in that, because when you get people engaged in that, they can see the big picture. And I used to love it before COVID. I'd be invited to do all these retreats, these corporate retreats are wonderful. You go off and you do some really good stuff. You get away from the workplace, and those things, despite the fact that everybody sneers at it a bit, they're very important, just to down tools and think about where's the whole show going. But if you tried this approach where, let's say, there was unexpected cost cutting in a business, people want to know where those cuts are, how deep are they affecting my job, do I still have a job? They want to know all that. They say they want the detail, they want the first. So it's no good going in there and saying, oh, it's in the best interest of the business. It may well be, but the point of the matter is people will want information and more detail. So that's where the mindful motivator comes in. Let's move on to the last one, and then we'll have time to have a bit of a chat about these. Mother Teresa. Now, the work that she did in the streets of Calcutta, Bombay, and these various parts of the world, she could not have done that had she not got people on side. I mean, imagine trying to get governments and NGOs on side, not to mention the fact that she had to get volunteers. I mean, it was a big deal. And so they're team builders. These people are they're natural team builders. They've got this ability to bring people together. So the big difference between the motivator and the collaborator, the motivator tries to link people to a big cause, whereas the collaborator tries to link people to each other. That's the difference, you see. And so collaborators are natural at working with and through other people to get the job done. And not everything requires that, of course. And that's where the blind spot comes in for the collaborator. Let's have a look at a very interesting couple of minutes interview. She didn't do many interviews, but this was one that she did. And you can see her emphasis when she's talking to the journalist. So let's have a look.
Ask somebody.
You know, the first sisters to join were the students that I had taught in Loreto. The first group we were about 12 by the time the congregation was established, and since then girls from all over the world have been joining.
What sort of girls were the Indian girls? Were they a very high caste?
Mixed. We have high, middle and ordinary, and that is the most beautiful part of these young girls, so fully dedicated and determined to give their all to Christ. They are all very anxious to live that life of poverty, because for us it's very important. If we really want to know the poor, we must know what is poverty. And that's why in our society, poverty is our freedom and our strength.
So that we would have poverty then, in your words, right here, in our homes here in Ireland. You don't have to go to the streets of Calcutta, is that what you're saying? That there's a lot, poverty is a lot of things.
There is two kinds of poverty. We have the poverty of material, like for example, in some places like in India and Ethiopia and Yemen and other places, where the people are hungry for a loaf of bread, a real hunger. But there is much deeper, much greater hunger, and that is the hunger for love, and that terrible loneliness and being unwanted, unloved, being abandoned.
Ask somebody.
So just before I pause and give you a chance to ask questions and talk about this, you can see that in her style. So a conductor of an orchestra doesn't play a musical instrument, but they wave their hands around. They earn a lot of money to do that, by the way. But obviously I'm being a bit facetious, but they're very good at that. All the good ones are. But really what they're doing is a classic collaboration. They're bringing in different parts of an orchestra at different times. A funeral director, even though they get a bad rap in many cases, their job is to bring all of these resources together to make it a memorable experience for the family of the deceased. And choreographers have got to get on with all sorts of big egos and draw people together and make them realize that we're all in this together. So if you this is where it gets interesting, because I think if you have a team of people and there's a strong view one way and a strong view the other way, whatever the other way is, it's probably very healthy for you to get those people together and nut it out, and to get so that people can actually hear the other perspective. Because if you don't do it and you sweep it under the carpet, it just gets stronger. People have a stronger view and they're not at all open to the other view. And I'm sure you've seen this, Gary, in the sporting world, where the team's going through a tough, they're going through a tough time. A good coach will get the team in the room, and there'll be a bit of truth telling and a bit of get things on the table. And sometimes, if that's done well, it can be quite therapeutic, and it can actually change the whole dynamic. That would be an example where you would use that. But if people need to know the logic and the rationale behind a decision, then they need to know that. And so it's no good you sitting there trying to build a team up if they don't know why something's been imposed on them from above. So it would be good to give people the information first through investigation, and then you can actually start to collaborate around how we might make that happen. All right, so I'll pause there. Am I right in that assessment, Gary? I'm assuming that in your career there would have been cases where you just had to put things on the table, and there was tension.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. Just for those who do follow the game of rugby league, you just got to look at the West Tigers, where they've come from, like from last year, like terrible performances. You know, they make a change in the coaching. They don't change the playing stuff that greatly, but when they did, they brought in influential players, leaders. And there's only 2 of them, 3 of them in the team, but it took a little while to get them together. And when you got a coach like Tim Sheens, has got a lot of history behind him and success behind him, and he starts, you know, dealing with the team through the media as well, because that's again what Tim is very good at. Now Wayne Bennett is very good at it as well. They'll talk about this over here about the team, but it's really going on over here. So it's you know, it's deception. And one of the things that I heard Tim Sheen say a couple of weeks ago, he said when the West Tigers were facing a bye, you know, when they don't play for the weekend, he said, "Geez, I hope we beat the bye." That was a very strong statement.
Yes.
Like, that would have just ripped the heart out of the players. But then he would have got them into in behind closed doors and circled the wagons, you know,
Yes.
and deliver a completely different message. Now they're coming out. They beat Penrith, who are the 2-time champions. They had a fantastic game the other week. They just lost. And now they turn around, they've beaten the Cowboys by 66 points. Like, it's just phenomenal, the turnaround. And that is just through, like you say, Tim, collaboration. Tim Sheens comes from a different angle. You know, listen to me over here, but he does protect his players in a private type situation. And then when they come together and it clicks, it's obviously very, very strong. Yeah. And that's what's happened there. But yeah, we've experienced it. It's at that time, to shorten it up, it's basically get in as a team, circle the wagons, and really, you know, you got to tell a few truths, and if you know, it's got to come out, and then you really do see a commitment. Yeah. Where what I do in my business, I can't quite be as strong and as directive as what you can be in a sporting team, but you got to sort of use the same principles. You got to be able to have the information, you know, to tell the outside sources whatever it needs to be told, and then but you come in, you say to your team, this is what we're going to do it. How are we going to do it? It's not going to say what I'm going to do about it. I say, how are we going to do about it? That's how I approach it.
Exactly. And if you don't do that, you just sweep things under the carpet, and it actually gets worse. So, you know, I think a good collaborator is somebody that says, look, let's just talk about the elephant in the room, and they put it on the table and they encourage people to talk about it. And I am sure it's not just good coaches that would do that. There would be leaders that would do that in the workplace. But I think I see too much of this, sweep it under the carpet. I don't want to open up a can of worms. But the reality is, it's not going away. It's not going to go away, and you've got to actually confront it. But you can do it in a respectful way. You can actually say to people, look, we're going to have a little bit of a truth-telling session here, but I don't want any negativity around anyone else. Set some rules, and then you say, here it is, and then just and you go around the table and you get people to talk. People walk out feeling better off because it's nothing's been said about it before, you see. So that's a good thing to do. So what I'm trying to do here for all of you is just to sensitize you to, okay, there's more than one way to go about this, but each of us have got our own bias. You see, this is the problem. And so we often don't value another approach. And what I'm giving you is 4 different approaches to deal with any situation where you've got to persuade people. And again, if we go back to coaches or anybody, you know, you talk about anybody in a leadership role, you will see them being flexible in the way they deal with situations, because sometimes people have to give the facts. Some people have to read people the riot act. Some people have to just put our arm around someone, give them a cuddle. And I think as leaders, if we learn to do more of that, all those things, we're going to become extremely influential and respected. The trick is knowing when to do it. And but the point is, if plan A isn't working, don't say, oh, well, you know, there's something wrong with everybody else. Look in the mirror and say, I'm going to try plan B or C or D. And the chances are you will connect with one of those. Now, here's something else, because I know some of you do talk to groups and maybe not thousands of people, but you might talk to groups of people. When you have a room full of people and you're trying to persuade people, here's something to think about. In that room, you've got all 4 personalities that I've just gone through with you. So your presentation should be, I need to tell people the facts, so I use investigation, right? They need to know the facts. That's fine. You've got to do a bit of that. You also need to explain to people the big picture, motivation. You need to explain why it's important that we do this and not that. So they need to know the big picture. You then stop and you ask people for their input. So you get questions from the floor, you get people engaged. Now I've got collaboration working for me. And then I finish my presentation by saying, let me sum up. Here are the advantages of what I'm suggesting. 1, 2, 3, 4. And by the way, if we don't do that, here are the disadvantages. 1, 2, 3, 4. How could you not be effective? You see, if you're writing an email, you're writing a report, same scenario, because your audience is more than one. So therefore, the larger the audience, the more versatile you have to be. And I'm hoping I'm trying to model the behavior that I'm suggesting here too. So if you do that, you're going to hit the mark with every single person in that room at some point. And that's good. That's what you want to do. So there we are. Has anybody got any other questions they want to ask, or comments or observations?
Tim, I'd just say to you that there's a couple of your team values that have come out of my various senior leadership groups. One is we say, attack the issue, not the person. And hence, everyone's prepared to go, well, we'll put it on the table. You can't say you turd, you can say I'm concerned about this. And the second one is different from ain't wrong. The lessons of investigator, calculator, motivator, collaborator, different from ain't wrong. And we all have different styles, and you all have permission to attack the issue, not the person, and do it in your own way. And that seems to have given people the confidence to put issues on the table, right? Because they're going to attack the issue, not the person.
Yeah.
And because we've accepted different from ain't wrong, crikey, most of my senior leadership teams are filled with immigrants, and we have multiple cultures. And so different from ain't wrong. It's a very healthy thing in Australia at the moment due to our multicultural population. So that's something that I'd share with you and Gary and Natalia, that by giving them permission to attack the issue and that different from ain't wrong, the quieter, more analytical ones are happy to input.
Yes, exactly. So I mean, the whole message out of today is pretty simple, really, and that is just be a little more versatile in the way you go around persuading, and just be aware that when you're not hitting the mark, a possible explanation could be that you're using the wrong approach.
Right.
Yeah.
Even though you feel comfortable with it, that's not the point. You're trying to influence somebody else. So you just change from plan A to plan B and go for it. And you'll be amazed that you'll see this resonate. And I just coming back to the police analogy I was using before, a lot of police become police officers because they are more value-based. Interesting, because it's a calling, it's not something everyone wants to do. And so they get into the police service, and what happens is that they get then sort of, indoctrinated into looking at everything through clinical, rational means, because that's the nature of policing. I remember talking to an undercover copper the other day. It was really interesting. And this guy, puts his life on the line every time he's infiltrating a drug gang or whatever. And he said to me, now I know why I'm doing the work I'm doing, because I'm obviously, he was below the line around those ones around motivation and collaboration. I can see it's a means to an end. And all of a sudden he realized that I'm doing this for there's an ideal here, and that is around, I have to do this in order to bring justice or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's interesting, but the main thing is just be aware of your bias, do the profile, check it out, and think to yourself, well, how can I improve my ability to persuade people? Because at the end of the day, that's the business of life, isn't it? It's all around influencing everybody about anything.
Tim, what you said, I think, is a great role for a chairman, and this is what I've picked up on. What are the facts? I'm being an investigator.
Yep.
What are the pluses and minuses of those facts? I'm being a calculator. How does it fit into the big picture? I'm being a motivator. Now, let's sum it up. What have I missed? What can we add? So I'm going to use that approach, that framework, for running my next senior leadership team meeting, because it's using all styles. And by using that framework, I'm going to make sure I do use all styles. So that's fantastic. That was a light bulb ping moment for me. I thought, you beauty, I've written it down and put asterisks around it and used my highlight pen. So I don't forget.
Very good, very, very strong. Tim, just the other influencer that I'd like to mention was Sir Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
Like, you look at that guy and what he did and how he did it. Like, the guy was a cripple. He just had this fantastic mind in this lecture that could get the message across, and people would just stand to attention. Like, you don't have to be, the smartest around the place. You don't have to be the most physical around the place. Like you say, you've just got to be able to learn and direct people. And I think he did it magnificently.
Winston Churchill was a motivator if you had to put him down in the fall. So his thing was talking about the big picture, and he inspired a nation by doing that. Yeah. And here's the interesting thing. When the war was over, he got kicked out. What's interesting is that he was in the right place at the right time. The nation needed somebody who was in the bottom left motivator in order to sort that to win. You see? But if he had a different style, I'll guarantee it wouldn't have been effective, and we might not even be sitting here talking.
Exactly. That's right. That's exactly right.
Anyway, thanks everyone. I'll send out the slides. I'll send out the recording. I haven't had a chance to go through some very practical things, but there are some slides in there will help you. But I think the main thing you need to be aware of is that, it's not the end of the earth if plan A doesn't work again. That's the main message out of all of this. And be aware of your biases. So do the survey, do the profile, have a look at yourself in the mirror and say, well, what do I got to work on? And there we go. So thanks, everyone. We've got one more
next week.
Yeah, next week. So thanks, everyone. I'll send out an email this afternoon. Cheers.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Andrew.
Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bye.